Know that she's going to be able to share some really interesting HR insights with you, our audience. So today we're going to talk more to Sarah about HR in the region.
You know, all the different aspects and the implications and how we can improve it and make it better in regard to employees making complaints about employers or vice versa. And there are those structures in place for making complaints.
Well, thank you for joining us on our podcast. I'd like to introduce you to my co-host, Sarah Brooks. She's the Managing Director of FICRA and has been here in the UAE since 2011. She is the go-to guru for HR. We share a number of networking groups and I'm forever seeing people asking for her advice and support. So I'm pleased to be co-hosting with her because I know that she's going to be able to share some really interesting HR insights with you, our audience. So today we're going to talk more to Sarah about HR in the region and just get her perspective on what's going on. So Sarah, your first question is, can you give us an overview of the HR landscape in Dubai? What do you think makes it unique versus other places?
So Dubai and the UAE are a very unique environment because of the age of the culture and the history here as we know it is quite young, first of all. So as we know, oil was first discovered in Abu Dhabi in about 1954, if I remember correctly. And then it's essentially snowballed from there to what we have today. I've been in the region since 2007. I've been in the UAE since 2011, as you mentioned. My first visit to Dubai was back in 1990, when it was an awful lot less than there is now. You know, I have vivid memories of driving along and there's lots of sand where there are now very large, tall, shiny buildings. And why that's important is because it's something that people often forget, that the pace of growth and the pace of development and the number of businesses that have grown here in the last 50, 60 years is just astronomical. And it has not been replicated anywhere else in the world. On top of that, you've got the development of the government, the culture of the Emiratis underpinning the government and all of the ministerial decrees, supporting businesses, setting the guidelines for how to do business and how not to do business, from employment law through to data protection and consumer rights legislation and everything else, which to a lot of us coming from what may be considered to be older cultures such as the UK, like myself, these things are second place. They've been in, the Consumer Rights Act was 1973. It's been around forever, whereas over here, it's still quite new. So there's those elements to think about, that it's a very new and very young environment. Add that to the mix of the sheer number of people living here, the millions of people living in such a small country. Whilst the area, the land space of the UAE is quite large in physicality, the inhabited areas are quite small, so it's quite densely occupied. But also the number of different nationalities and cultures that are here. There's over, I think I read somewhere recently, there's over 100 different nationalities that are currently living and working in the UAE. And that number of people is growing on a daily basis. I haven't looked at the statistics from immigration recently, but the number of people coming through is in the millions on a daily basis. So there's a lot of, I want to say, not immaturity, but youth to how things are. And what that means is that you've got a real sort of almost a panorama, if you like, of HR functionality. And if we look at it from sort of plot it on a line graph, that panorama of, the top end being the very sort of expert HR, very good employee culture, employee engagement, lots of wellness benefits, really ingrained into the business, and, a real key stakeholder seat at the top table approach to HR, and that value is recognized element down to the other end, and I say down to, but it's not, it's across, my apologies, but across to the other end of the spectrum, which is a more administrative and functional role in terms of the physicality of employing people, paying people, employing more people, paying more people, and then, managing all of the data that goes with that. So there's a lot of companies that sit at the bottom, that left-hand side of the spectrum. There's a very few companies that sit at the top end, and they tend to be the more global entities. But then you've got a large mass of companies that are in the middle that are slowly picking up pace and moving towards the far right side of that spectrum. It is a very dynamic environment to be in, because you have so much change happening outside and movement outside of the UAE, in terms of, if you look at the development of HR within countries such as the US or the UK and Australia, and the advances that are being made there in terms of employee engagement, and I've mentioned wellness and health, and the attitude and approach to that, versus what we have in the UAE, it makes it quite difficult to keep up with. And because there are so many companies, and the majority of companies are sort of sitting between the left-hand side of that spectrum to the middle, they don't necessarily have the full awareness and cognizance of the importance and value and the business benefit of HR as a function. So it leaves a lot of companies to be very transactional in their HR process. That makes it interesting, because there's lots of low-hanging fruit. So there's lots of opportunities for development and change and improving things. And it can be from something very simple through to something extremely technical. But, there are plenty of opportunities for change. So that's why it's exciting. That's why it's unique.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Yeah. What brought you here then, and what do you like about it?
Well, so what brought me here? As I mentioned, I came on a visit in 1990. My father had been working over in Abu Dhabi for a while, and I, did a few trips over here, so I was familiar with the culture of the region. I say familiar; I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. But it wasn't something that fazed me. And I was approached actually in 2007 about a position in Kuwait, of all places. And at that time, my response was, well, why not? Let's go, let's see. And as they say, the rest is history. I've been here ever since. I've had a stint in Kuwait. I've been fortunate to have some time in Oman, in Abu Dhabi, more recently in Dubai, and I've also had involvement with positions in Qatar and Saudi Arabia as well. So I've got a full rounded experience in the region. I enjoy the culture and the heritage of the region, as well as the quality of living, the standard of living. That's very much something that is important to me. Work-life balance that I've got at the moment, working with my own business, I'm enjoying that and the dynamism, and making a difference in HR. It's something that I pride myself on. I have often been accused of not being a normal HR person because I bring a sense of humour, but also an awareness of what we can do better. So being able to look at things and say, yes, but if that's the minimum, what else can we do? Yes, but if that's the minimum, what else can we do? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, looking at everything holistically. So not just saying I'm the HR manager, this is what does, but looking at things from the opinion of the employee, of the managers, of the business owners, and every angle of that sphere doesn't have angles on it, but diamond, I guess, to see all the different aspects and the implications and how we can improve it and make it better, and the little changes and things. I've spent over 2 decades in HR between the UK and the Middle East now, and worked in some fabulous, my previous to my company, I was working in hospitality, working with, a large variety of nationalities in the Middle East, but not so much in the UK. Although being a Brit in most companies, I was in the minority still, especially in the hospitality industry. I've had a lot of challenges to deal with, and can pull on that experience to work with small companies and things to make it better in their environments.
So what makes HR in the UAE so different to anywhere else in the world?
Okay, the nuts and bolts of it are not different, right? You've got your employee life cycle, recruitment, onboarding, offboarding, performance management, paying salaries, annual leave, all this stuff. It's the same. There are rules and nuances around that obviously are different, and that is down to fabulous things like the labour law, regulations that are put in place, also around the structure. In the UAE, with regards to the workforce, the majority of the workforce in the UAE are not UAE nationals. So by derivation, you've got work permits and visa complications to add to the mix that you don't necessarily have in the UK. Although things have changed since I left the UK and Brexit happened, where we had a large number of different nationalities working with us, but we didn't have to worry about visas because it was all part of the EU, whereas now that's obviously different. So this is something that, it part of the mix. So here, nuts and bolts are the same. It's just the polish and the icing on top that makes the difference, with the different cultures, with the different attitudes and behaviours, the different ways of working that people have, and the environment in which you're working as well, with the legislation that's there.
Okay, so that brings me nicely on to the next question then. So what are some of the labour law legislations that we should be aware of?
You're going to get me started now.
Don't go through all of them.
No, I
but
won't.
Like,
go
what are
through
the
all
key
of them.
ones that we should be aware of?
Very simply, the UAE, every company in the UAE has a trade license, and depending upon who issues that trade license, defines what law that company, from an employment law perspective, needs to be regulated by. There are what are called mainland companies, which are trade licensed under the DED, so Dubai Economic Department, and they are governed by the Federal Law 33 of 2021. Okay. There is also the executive regulations that support that, which is number 1 of 2022. Yes, I know, I'm a labour law nerd, it's fine. So this is mainland. Now, then you have free zone companies. So these are companies that are set up under something like JAFSA or TCOM, DMCC, or DKP, the Dubai Knowledge Park, these type of ones, even Shams in Sharjah, things like this, okay? They're governing, for the majority of those free zones, they're governed also by the same mainland and legislation that I've just mentioned. Some free zones are exempted and have their own legislation. At the moment, there's only 2 of those. One of those is DIFC, which has its own laws and regulations. And the second one is Abu Dhabi General Markets, or ADGM, which also has its own laws and regulations. Now, for both of those 2, whilst they have their own legislation, it is mostly the same as or based on the Mohre, the mainland labour law. Okay, so it's not that complicated on the difference. Then you have, and the final aspect is the government or semi-government entities, which have their own federal authority for human resources and their own legislation through that, which again is not vastly different, but there are differences between all of those different, or each of those legislations. Okay, it's slightly more complicated than other countries. That's fine, but they're not difficult documents to understand if you commit to reading them and understanding them.
Okay. So, how does that impact HR then? Like, what are some of the challenges that HR face in terms of adhering to the labour law? What do you see as some of the compliance issues within HR?
So a lot of the time, and some of the history on the labour law, if we just look at the mainland labour law, which covers the majority of companies under mainland and the free zones, until February 2022, that is the first time that the labour law has been completely rewritten since 1980. So the labour law was a little bit out of date. There also weren't the structures in place for reporting issues as stringently as there are now. So there wasn't the support for the employees, equally for the employers, to pick up with employees that were not following the requirements. And because there wasn't that involvement and support, it meant that companies and individuals as employees can get away with more and not follow the rules because there was no recourse for them. Now that there is recourse and the government are taking it seriously in regard to employees making complaints about employers or vice versa, and there are those structures in place for making complaints, lodging queries, mediation between entities and parties that are involved, companies are finding that there's a general feeling from my discussions I've had with companies that the labour law is on the side of the employees. It's actually not. The only reason they feel that is because employees are now able to stand up for themselves and say, but you're doing this wrong. And that's something that never ceases to amaze me. I have a number of people who have reached out to me over the past 2, 3, 4 years asking for help and advice and support on particular situations that they're facing in their employment, whether they are asking too much, too little, whether the company is behaving legally or not. And 9 times out of 10, the company's not behaving legally. And for me, that is just not smart. It's not sensible. And it's something that can be easily avoided. You know, there's plenty of awareness and plenty of information that you can source for yourself. There's a helpline number from the ministry that you can pick up and ask questions to free of charge. And my knowledge of the labour law has been built on doing exactly that, basically.
You got your own hotline to them.
I have my own hotline. I've spent hours on the phone and picked their brains, you know. I mean, I've actually flagged up queries with them that they've sat and gone, oh, we didn't realise that. Especially after the new law was released when, you know, everything changed. So it's like, okay, we got to get up to speed on this as quickly as possible. So the information is available. One of the challenges that is faced by many people is the fact that the labour law as a document is written in Arabic. It is the legal language of the UAE. It is then translated into English. And whilst it's a very good and comprehensive translation, sometimes it doesn't always mean what it says. And it's not, as you would say, written in crystal clear English. So you've got to cross-reference one article clause with another article clause. So because it says this here, but it doesn't say that there, it means this, which can be somewhat challenging and complicated, especially if you're not familiar with it and you're not referring to it on a regular basis. So that's some of the challenges that people face, is that awareness and understanding of actually what is the legislation. Oftentimes as well, people forget about the executive resolutions, which is a supporting document and actually has articles that give a little more definition and depth around some of the articles in the main labour law that clarify things. So they forget to look at that. So they just go on the one document and then fall foul because they haven't looked at that.
And so what would you say is kind of frequent malpractice that you're seeing in the region then?
Well, yeah, too many, unfortunately.
That you can talk about?
Yeah, no. I mean, look, I would never mention names of companies or individuals.
Of course.
But, you know, I've supported individuals who have had their gratuity threatened to be taken away, who have had forced resignations, and when I'm talking about gratuity, I mean gratuity where they've been employed with the company for 13 or 14 years. So it's not a small amount of money. And for those listening that don't know what gratuity is, it's a social security payment that's accumulated over the course of your employment associated with your salary, as like a savings scheme, because we don't have pensions here in the UAE. And companies who try to terminate individuals without notice, thinking that they can forfeit the gratuity, which is also illegal. Not giving notice correctly, not giving enough notice, not following the disciplinary policies. You know, one of the things in the labour law, the new labour law, is that there is a very clearly defined disciplinary policy, which not a lot of people know about, or actually recognise that there is supposed to be a formal disciplinary process with an appeal structure in place as well. And a lot of people miss that. And there are timelines, i.e., you know, a disciplinary incident should be reported and dealt with within 30 days with the individual. If you don't do it in 30 days, you can't discipline them about it. You can do an investigation, but it can't take more than 60 days from the date that you know. Like the penalty for a disciplinary can't happen after 60 days of knowing about it if you've started the disciplinary. And a lot of people don't know that. And I've helped and advised individuals with those types of situations. And when I say helped individuals, it goes from me supporting them and giving them advice based on documents that they share with me or information that they share with me about their situation. And, look, I'm not a lawyer at all. I have no legal qualifications whatsoever, just as a caveat. And I give that to everyone, because I know that in order to give legal advice, you need to be a lawyer and you need to be legally qualified. I give people the benefit of my expertise and advice on my understanding of the labour law. And if I am not sure about something, I call the ministry to find out and pose that question to them to get the best understanding I can. There are some things, though, that are very black and white, quite easy. So I've supported people, coach them with what they need to be saying to their companies, what articles they need to quote, even on how they can call the ministry and make a complaint against their employer as well, and how to approach that conversation to get the best out of the conversation and the benefit, and for it to result in a complaint against the employer, because sometimes that doesn't always work. Based on a number of different factors.
And what are some of the key trends that you're seeing in HR in the UAE?
So, as we mentioned, the UAE is quite young in its formulation of businesses and labour law and things like this. So the trends that we have at the moment are kind of behind the times of what has maybe been put in place in other companies. And other countries even, rather than other companies, other countries. If I think back to my experience and things when I was working in the UK in 2001, 2002, for probably one of my first HR roles, the company that I worked for there actually had a hotline for employees who were facing issues, mental health issues and challenges, that they could call for support, guidance and advice. That was, my maths is right, 23 years ago. That hasn't quite arrived here yet. We've literally just had, and it's very well supported, but we've literally just had government resolutions acknowledging and I say acknowledging, but including mental health in things like medical insurance and awareness and, positivity moving forwards. So it's coming to the forefront of people's minds. It's getting there, but it's still taking its time. One of the other things is around the associated benefits. So and I give examples from, I've been fortunate to work in a number of different countries in the Middle East. I've been unfortunate that other than that, I've only worked in the UK. So I can only relate back to this side of the world or that side of the world. In the UK, we would tend to get benefits that are over and above the basic of associated with the company that you work for, okay? And I give an example of, restaurant discounts if you're in a food and beverage company, or hotel room discounts if you're in a hotel company, for example. Over here, yes, you get those discounts. In some companies, you will get a benefit, okay? Retail spaces, I know, are quite good at giving those. Outside of that, there's often not any company-related benefits. You are seen to be given a benefit because you've got a visa from the company and because you've got medical insurance. Both of those things are legal requirements. So it's not really a benefit. And it's something that I think companies are missing a trick on, that they need to just look at what other benefits can be given and how that can be extrapolated. One of my clients, for example, which is a medical services company, they provide those medical insurance and visa, absolutely, without question. On top of that, because we're a medical service company, we also offer free medical tests for visas, expedited ones, and we offer discounts on the various services that we offer for friends and family. It's not just for the individual, but it's friends and family. And these are things like expensive blood tests that would that has a lot of value to people, especially if it's a family member who maybe has an issue or a condition, diabetes or something that needs to be checked, female hormones or something. So it's taking that extra step and saying, we want to give back to the employees. The salary is not just enough. And I think that's a trend that needs to be picked up on and moved forwards with. There's also the trends, and that kind of links into, but the wellness trend. And it's something that I think is a bit, I know that an element of wellness has been there subconsciously, and I say this because it's not been shouted about as such as being a wellness activity within hospitality industry. So the majority of hospitality companies here will accommodate their own staff. So they provide accommodation, they provide transport, they provide meals as part of the package. Mm-hmm. But within that, they then obviously are taking care 100% of the employee. And that then is that wellness element. So they're taking care of the food that's provided and making sure it's healthy, that it meets what the employees are looking for. Having sports activities maybe, or, games nights or whatever, movie nights that we used to put on. And it sounds really quite flippant, but it's about making that person feel well and feel happy and feel good. It's not perfect. It's a start. There needs to be more. But I think that's something, again, that we see growing and developing with a lot of companies. There are, some of the connections that we have in common are in that mental health and wellness space, and they're being picked up by a lot of companies to do sort of mental health first aid courses and qualifications within large companies, which is fabulous because it means they're looking to support their team, to make their team feel happy and healthy and safe at work.
Okay.
But there's there's so many trends that are happening globally. Not all of them are applicable over here for various reasons, but there are definitely more that are applicable that should be picked up on.
Well, thank you for all of your insights today, Sarah. So that's an introduction to both our key topics for the first 2 episodes of our podcast. For the next few episodes, we're going to be delving into all sorts of different aspects of the life cycle of the employee, whether that's from, job descriptions, employee onboarding, performance management, individuals exiting, and how do HR play a part in that, and what are the cultural intelligence implications that need to be considered through all of that process. So stay tuned for the coming episodes.